Hello, welcome to this week's edition of Greet the Week. I'm Mona Duncan, and co-person is Jan Moray, and we're glad to see Laura joining us, and anyone else that comes in or sees us in the future, thank you very much. Today's topic, Jan, it was really interesting that you said, have you ever set a boundary and come across as being mean?
Right.
And then whenever they start to push back, you begin to feel that you've been unfair and all this. And so how do you settle all of that? So have you ever had an experience like that, Jan?
Well, I have. Remember learning to set boundaries and learning to be assertive. I guess learning to be assertive was the first thing I learned. It was not too long ago when I learned about setting boundaries. But, one of the things is I was just very agreeable and was afraid to speak up. And so I would, was learning to assert myself, which, and maybe we can talk about this a little bit later, but it kind of appears that asserting yourself is similar to setting boundaries, because usually what you're doing is somebody's overstepping, into your territory, and you need to say, no, wait a minute, I don't like that or something. But I do remember on a couple of occasions setting a boundary and then having somebody come back to me and say, well, that's mean. And just kind of stop to think, is that really being mean if I'm trying to let somebody know that I don't appreciate what they're doing? And so I just thought we'd start the discussion about, what people think, or if that being mean is just their way of trying to turn things around to get you to not set that boundary and to let them do something. And the first example that I had of that was one time with one of my children. I was telling them not, that I didn't want them to do something, and they turned around and said, well that's mean. I was like, well, I don't think it's mean. but you can't help but feel a little, second guess yourself and feel a little guilty about saying, well, maybe I am being a little unreasonable, but if you stop and think about it and say, no, that's really what I want. I don't want somebody stepping on my toes or not letting me speak, or whatever you're setting your boundary for. So I just thought I'd throw it out there and see what kind of thoughts other people have. So Mona, have you had a situation similar to that?
Yes, two in particular that comes to mind. There was one, a person was, they were required to attend the class that I was teaching. And because of scheduling and difficulty and going home and putting kids to bed and all that kind of stuff, I had mentioned that if she would come in early, I would work with her one-on-one for a little while to get the basics, kind of out of the way, and then she could go on and not attend the class. However, when it came about 10 minutes before class time, she had not come early, as in early mid-afternoon. And so whenever she came in, she says, oh, I don't have to attend this class tonight, do I? And I said, yes, ma'am, you certainly do. And she straightened up and she turned around real quick and she said, well, you don't have to be so hateful about it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so the class was starting, and I went ahead and, attended the class, and she was there, and I treated her as amiably as with anyone, because it's where I come from my point of view, where I've gotten to at this point in life, okay, is that if I speak up to someone and, they see it as being mean or hateful or whatever, at that moment, I can't deal with it. I've got to keep on, it's not that I don't want, it's not that I don't care. It's that what your comeback on that is valid. It just can't be paramount at the moment. And so, but, I will speak up, but you know what? That doesn't mean I'm speaking against you. It means that I am there for you. I mean, we have cats, and I've learned to be a Zen master thanks to my cats.
Because what master?
A Zen master.
Zen master, okay.
Because I know that they love me. I know that they need me. But I also know that it's 100% on their terms.
Right.
And so whenever, I'm wanting them to come sit on my lap, or I'm wanting them to be amenable, or I'm wanting them to get down from something,
Mm-hmm.
and they act in a different way, I don't take it personally. Mm-hmm. It's not taking it personally. It's taking it seriously. And so I went on with the class, and I called on her, and if I know myself at all, I use the same tone of voice that I would have if she had not called me hateful.
Right.
I was interacting with her and asking questions and so forth. And then afterward, after the evening was over with, before I even went home, I sat and I really began to think about that. Was I coming across in a way that was hateful? And but realizing that often the person you are giving the boundary for is so wounded they just can't take it. Mm-hmm. Or they're so immature, whether it's wounded or not, or maybe just immature. And I like to give the illustration of the mother who divided the candy bar with the children. Let me grab something here that I can make a little. So here is the candy bar. Can you see it? That square?
Yeah, but barely.
Kinda. I need
lines. It's kind of mixed together. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, anyway, that's supposed to be the candy bar. I don't know what happened to my mark. Oh, there it is. The mark's a lot. So here is the candy bar, and there is one parent and two children. And so mother says, okay, oldest sibling, here is a candy bar, and I would like you to half it with your sibling. And so the older sibling takes the candy bar, and he gets out the knife and the slide rule, and he measures and measures and measures, where's it going to be? Where's it going to be? It'll be here or here, where. And ahead of myself. Candy bar, two children. So kid gets he gets his slide rule, and he's measuring it, getting the thumb to it, and everywhere's going to be about so I can divide it. And so then he goes, and mother says, oh, thank you, elder sibling, for halving this candy bar to share with your younger sibling. Now, younger sibling, which half do you want?
Uh-huh.
And which half do you think the younger sibling chooses?
The larger one.
Of course.
And what does the older sibling say?
Well, that was my half.
Not fair, not fair. That was my half. You're mean. You're hateful. You're this. You're that. Now, why was that older sibling that was there to look at the boundary and, and cut it and divide it in half? That's what Mom had asked. That was the instruction. Why would he protest?
Well, maybe because he made the impression that he was dividing it directly in half because he used the ruler to measure both sides, but then in the end didn't cut it where the half point was, made sure he went on one side of it.
Was he being a little conning there with his younger sibling? And was he being fair?
Right.
In cutting the thing. And but he could not accept that fairness because he was so emotionally involved in his position. And anytime we are setting a boundary, all too often the boundaries we are setting for is against someone that we love very much, care for very much, and they are very important to us and our happiness and our well-being.
Right.
And we are equally important to them. And so if we set a boundary for them that they are not emotionally at the point where they can receive it, it's going to be a pushback. And sometimes it just takes communication.
Yeah, because the way you address the situation, when somebody's pushing back and saying not fair, you can get upset and argue back and forth about it not being fair, or you can just provide information and let them know that well, you're littler than I am, and so I thought it would be fair to give you a smaller piece of the candy bar than for me, because since I'm the older one and I'm bigger than you, I deserve to have more, or to explain what your side of the, what your position is.
And so, in explaining that position, do you think Mom would have been a little less frustrated at the kid cutting it larger and taking and wanting the larger piece?
Well, it's possible. It depends on where she's coming from. He may be convincing enough to, have a good enough argument to be able to convince her that he deserved the larger piece.
So, are we saying that there's always validity in the other person's point of view?
Well, there always is. You may not agree.
We want to see it or not.
Right. You may not agree with it, but there always is, and it's always good to listen and to understand where the other person is coming from, because sometimes you don't even consider that other point of view, that other position. You've got in your mind this is the way it is, and you're not entertaining any other thoughts except I'm right and I know what I want.
And so it's being able to back off, listen to another, but asking for, would you please share with me why you have that offense, or not the offense, but why you're seeing it differently. Whenever there is that pushback, can you tell me what you have understood me to say? Maybe I've said it in a way that didn't come across in a way that was what you're understanding. So
that's the thing, is to try not to become angry or to start fussing back at the person, but to take a minute to really try to understand where they're coming from. Because sometimes, they may be offended and want to battle you for it, but other times, they're just as serious in their position as you are, and they feel like you're taking advantage of them, and so it's worth listening to both sides.
Mm-hmm. So what are some emotions, some feelings that might be arising in someone else that would cause them to push back at whatever you're saying or doing?
Well, that you're taking advantage of them, that you're crossing over their boundaries. They're trusting you to divide it fairly, and then when you don't, it's offensive, and I feel like that I'm being taken advantage of, and I'm not being treated fair.
Might they feel unappreciated?
Right. Yeah.
Maybe that you're putting them down, belittling them.
Mm-hmm.
Might they feel helpless?
Yeah.
Like here's a boundary that's being set and I'm not capable of meeting it.
Right. And with a younger sibling, there's probably been a number of occasions when they felt like it was unfair, that the older sibling was taken advantage of.
Right.
So,
yeah.
So that's probably the first thought that comes to mind whenever something like that.
I used that concept with my children, but I did it slightly differently. I would say, you are older, so you may use the knife to divide it for you and your brother, but your brother will get to pick the piece first. So they both knew what the parameters were beforehand. It worked beautifully.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful input, Sharon. The fact that you set that, not only did you set the boundary, but you gave the reasoning, and that the fact that the other one it wasn't a trick. You didn't try to trick them.
Exactly.
Let them know.
Uh-huh.
And it was building character and responsibility within them.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah, helping them to see through other people's eyes. That if I have that over less than half or more than half, and I'm thinking that I'm getting the bigger half, how fair am I being then to the other that I'm passing it on to? So that was a beautiful way to look at it. So whenever that pushback does come, what are your thoughts on us? How can we be taking it seriously but not personally?
Well, it's to try to understand that the other person does have their own point of view, and that two people may not agree. And so even though you may feel like it's an attack on you, to not jump to that, to act on that thought right away before you get a little bit more information.
Mm-hmm. Or if things like that happen frequently, that there's a lot of that pushback. How are some ways that we can begin to communicate in ways that would not engender so much of that pushback?
Well, I'm thinking about a situation with that's been going on recently, and several of you have been involved in this. Where two people have very different views about how to proceed, and so one person is going by their views, the other person is going by their views, and they're not in sync with each other. And so when you find you're constantly in conflict and constantly saying, no, that's not the way we're going to go, we're going to do this, and it's to step back and say, okay, we need to take a few steps back and try to understand each other and understand where each of us is coming from.
And getting to the point that we own the way we see things, but that we have a limited view, and that there are other inputs into it, and being open to that rather than being offended by the fact that someone else is wanting to give an inroad. It's sharing the road.
Right. I mean, there are a lot of people that have difficulty seeing another person's point of view, and for you to understand that this, that the other person is having a difficulty understanding where you're coming from, you can take responsibility to say, hey, it just sounds like we're not on the same page here. I hear what you're saying, and I don't really agree. Let's try to understand what your reasoning is and my reasoning is.
So does it start with a willingness to be willing?
Yeah.
To hear what the other person's coming from?
Right.
Yeah. Does that apply to parents and children?
Oh, absolutely.
Does that apply to players and coaches? Does that apply to coaches and parents?
Right.
And why you didn't play my child, or how the call to the referees as to what call you made on my child.
Right.
I like the analogy of the referee or the umpire. That ball. How do you determine what to call it? And one of them says, I call it as I see it.
Right.
And one of them says, I call it the way it is.
Oh.
Third one says, it's not anything until I call it.
Oh.
And so, which one of those would you rather have as someone you're working with?
I call it, I see it.
I call it as I see it. And even if they call it as we see it, and we may have a contention with that, having the courage to speak up and say, may I get a word in here, or may I point at us? You're asking for permission rather than just, because this never works.
It does not.
It just doesn't. It has a tendency to, close the ears and close the mind, and everything else just shuts down, with the exception of the energy of trying to prove the point.
Yeah. Well, and it also evokes so many emotions that you might get carried away by those emotions and not be able to think clearly. I don't know of an exact situation, but I can think of, when you're in conflict with somebody and you're constantly fighting about different things, or they're being very, very assertive and very direct, and I'm going to use controlling instead of assertive. And so when you start feeling that somebody else is being controlling, you get a bit defensive, and then your perception changes, and so you're not really looking at things quite as fairly as if you would have if this person had not been controlling. But then once that control is eased a bit, then you're able to see the other side a little bit.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, whenever that tension begins to rise, you're not even looking at the issue. You're looking at the other person.
Right. Yeah. Right. Right. You just want to be
big
against
thing.
another person. You don't want to agree with that person.
Right.
And then you
Right.
can go back later and revisit it, and so you're kind of looking at it from a different angle because you're no longer emotionally charged, and you'll go, whoa, why did I fight so hard on that thing?
So it's being in tune with ourselves enough that whenever we are speaking, setting a boundary, whatever, that however the person responds to us, and if it is in a negative way, to be aware of ourselves enough that we do not negative against negative.
Yeah.
And that we, with our attitude, with our verbiage, with our distance, maybe it's a little bit time to back off and say, you know, maybe even as in with the lady that, you know, that I guess maybe her, again, looking at her point of view, she may have thought 10 minutes was early enough to come in.
Right.
Even though we had mentioned that she was coming in earlier that day. But it is being open to the fact that we may be saying things that others are not really understanding what we're saying.
Yeah.
And that maybe they do have another point of view. Mm-hmm. And it may be foreign to us, maybe while we're just so wanting to push against it. There may be other things about them. We may be judging them in ways that is not conducive to the boundary setting and the boundary receiving.
Yeah. Well, and I also think, because I'm guilty of this, I have in my mind how I think things ought to be, and I'm talking with somebody and they say something which isn't exactly the way I envisioned it, but I took what they said to confirm what I was thinking. And then I agree and everything's fine. And then a little while later, some you know, you're talking about it and they're saying, well, you agreed to do this. I said, no, I didn't. You said you would do this. And so we filter out, or we just don't hear correctly what they're saying because we've already got our mind set in a certain way that we're gonna do it this way, and they're agreeing to doing it that way. Because
the words we use, well, words have symbols to them. Mm-hmm. And so we can hear a word and we can speak out a word and 10 different people can see a different little symbol of how it connects together. Right. And then whenever you get to putting the pieces of the puzzle together so that it lines up in a 1, 2, 3 ABC order, that's whenever you begin to realize that, oh, this understanding wasn't what I was saying, or I said this, but it was understood another way. Yeah. And how can we not cut the puzzle piece that it'll fit in there? Because how can we look and see that there was another piece to it that has the right increments to fit in there that will work beautifully, but we just need to look a little bit more and communicate a little bit more and actually find it. Yeah. You know, so a technique that works real well with those kinds of things when you tend to misunderstand what the other person is saying is to ask the person, you know, to tell me back what I just said. Right. Or what, yeah, how did you understand it? Right. And then have them say it in their words, and then you can work on that together. Say, no, that's not exactly what I meant. Now repeat that back to me. What did you hear? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I mean, some words in our language is built in to be confusing, such as bi-weekly. Oh, right. It can mean every other week, or it can mean, you know, twice a week. And that can cause major conflict, and you're really saying the same thing. It's just you're seeing it differently and using a different, or, well, you're not seeing it. If one is seeing it every other week and one's seeing it twice a week, that's a major difference. And it can, you know, and then you say, oh, now I see. So usually the ones who, like I said a minute ago, who are the most important to us in meeting our overall world satisfaction and having our quality world to run smoothly is usually the ones we have the most conflict with.
Right.
and the most misunderstandings and those confrontations. And so it's going back to making choices.
Right. Yeah, my husband and I, we see things very differently. And somebody will say something and we'll take it completely different ways. And we understand that about each other. And so we very often have conversations. Now, what did you take that to mean? Well, I took it to mean this. And so I had a feeling you took it a little differently from the way I did.
I figured you was wrong.
So,
a nice way of saying it.
and so we've learned to double check and to make sure that we understood it clearly. And there's no blame on the other person, but we just know that we view the world a little differently, and that's just part of it, part of the way it is.
And that each one is valid.
Yeah.
And that sometimes yeah. And so it's back to making choices. It's accepting the fact that each person, you as well as the one you're setting the boundary for, or the one that's pushing back, that each person has infinite worth and value as a human being. And it is making the choice to be open and honest with yourself. It's making the choice to be open to some other information and a point of view that you hadn't seen before. It is choosing to quit mind reading and judging others.
Right.
Thinking that we're understanding it. It's getting honest with ourselves and that, I do misunderstand some things, rather than when I get it, I get it.
Right. You know, another thing about, you know, when I wrote in the blurb for today's talk, that I said, you know, they tell you, the other person will say that you're being mean, and you need to be careful on how you respond to that accusation.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, my first thought is to get defensive and say, well, I'm not being mean. How can you say that? But it's better to kind of back off a little bit and say, so tell me, what don't you think is fair about this? And try to gain a little understanding from the other person's perspective. And that way, it's a little easier to come to some kind of an agreement as to why you're setting that boundary and what don't you like about it, and
what you
validating that they don't like it.
Right. Well, my response to that young lady when she told me I was being so hateful, I told her, I said, well, I'm sorry about that. Class starts in 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And then, you know, it's a done deal. I mean, she could have left. There's a lot of things she could have done, but then it would have been an organic ramification of what, you know, it was out of my hand then, because she had been ordered to be at a class or given the leeway of coming early in the afternoon so that it could be handled at a different time. And so whenever those things do happen and there are that difficulty there, then we have to step back. You know, it wasn't my place to bring any ramifications against her.
Mm-hmm.
We have to organically let consequences fall.
Yeah.
And that's when we really can begin to learn.
Well, that particular situation, you were not the one making the rule that she had to be there. You were trying to accommodate her, and she was trying to take advantage of your niceness to accommodate her.
And back with the example of the mom and the candy bar, and then once Sharon gave the fact of, I wasn't trying to trick you. I was being the kind of mom that wouldn't try to trick, that would let you know in advance that, guess what, your younger sibling is going to be able to have the first choice.
Right.
There might have been an entirely different outcome with that.
Right. If he had that information at the beginning, he may have cut it right where he measured it.
Right. The initial measurement. Yes.
Instead of him slipping and moving a little off center.
And so, as we have those examples to look at, and then others examples in our own individual lives, and think about them and look about how could I have handled it differently, so it would have continued to have been relationship building and connecting, and for the good of the whole, rather than, you know, having widened that crack that may lead to a break.
Right.
So it could have been healing rather than disconnecting, rather than harming.
Yeah. That's a good note to end this session today. And I just thought I would let everybody know the William Glasser Institute has been advertising these Greet the Week sessions on they've been sending mailings out. And last weekend, the website was totally redone. The organization is now being called the Glasser Institute for Choice Theory, and things are going to be changing with the rebranding effort. So there's a possibility, and I don't know yet, that you will no longer receive an email saying that this Greet the Week is coming up on every Monday at this time with the topic. But Mona and I will continue to do.
We are continuing it.
So we're going to continue. So keep that email that has the time and the link, and we will continue to do this. If you're on Facebook, I do post these on the Sunbelt Facebook page, the William Glasser Institute Sunbelt Region Facebook page, and I will also be putting them on the Choice Theory Fan Club page.
I hope that they will continue to remind us once a week, because I mean that's the way that we click into.
I understand.
Without that, I have no way to get to you.
Yeah. Well, I have your email address, Jerry. Well, I'm going to go ahead and sign off for now. Hang on, those people who are online, hang on right now. But for those people who want to continue to get messages, I'd encourage you to email me. I'll give you my email address on here. It's
I'm kind of in a hurry. Could you email me, please? I've got to go.
Okay.
We'll keep you in the loop, Jerry. Make sure of it.
We'll keep you in the loop.
Because we value your being with us.
Thank you very much. I value you too.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So you can email me at Jeanette More, that's JANETTEMORE @gmail.com, and I can add you to. I don't know. We'll create our own email and send to those of you who want to be informed, so that you can join every week. So with that, I'm going to turn off the recording. Thank you.